The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some things that you should have on your radar. Depending on your age, of course, is how much further it should be on your screen. You know, if you ever look at a radar screen, if you watch a movie or something, you'll see like the plane moving in and it gets closer and closer. And so depending on your age, I think you should have your future kind of retirement plan on that radar somewhere, maybe far out or closer. And again, this is dependent on your age. And it's actually the opposite of what you think. The younger you are, the actual more you should be thinking about it. The older you are, the less you should be thinking about it. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. Now that statement may take you a little off guard. The fact that if you're younger, you should be actually thinking more about retiring or your retirement than if you're older. Because if you're older and you're starting to plan your retirement in your 50s, it's too late. You're way behind the curve there, and you're going to have to really accelerate your retirement. I'm not a financial show here, but you can go to any financial podcast or just go on the internet, and you can find different charts and algorithms that show the power of compound interest. You know, for instance, you know, if you invested $1,000 a month at age 18, you'll have like over 30 years or 50 years, you're going to have like 1.8 million. If you invested 1,000 when you're 24, you're going to have like 1.4 million. I'm making these numbers up, but you get the idea that the younger you start, the more the interest has time to compound and grow on your investments. Now, this year is kind of an anomaly because the stock market is down pretty badly in all the indexes, but basically the market is going to go up. It trends up. And it has an average rate, I think, of like 10% or 8 to 10% a year as far as the money you invest will grow in the market. I don't really invest in the stock market myself. I have some mutual funds, but I'm not a big stock market player. And it's one of those things where it's not that I don't trust it or believe in it. I know a lot of people use that as their retirement. My dad in particular has all his money in the market, and his work had a matching 401k. So I know that it is something that you can invest in at a young age and build and use that as your retirement. If you're counting on Social Security, I think the projection is that by 2035 is going to be bankrupt. It's kind of like one of those Ponzi schemes where you invest money and then the person that's supposed to invest it and make it grow is taking your money and paying the earlier investors with it. And eventually all that money is going to run out and the whole thing collapses and no one has any money. And the people that invested first get their money, which are the older people now. And then people later, those that retire in the year 2035, may not have anything in the pot to draw from. Now, the government's always funding it. They're always increasing the national debt to fund Social Security. So I'm not extremely worried about that. But you should think about not having that as a safety net. So whatever money you put in there may not be available for you. We don't know the future there. It's better if you just fund your own retirement, is what I'm saying. And you can fund it in many different ways. And by the way, if you are self-employed and you're paying income taxes, you are paying into the Social Security system. So you are going to have some money being recorded. You can go to their website and just type in your Social Security number and you'll be able to see how much money you're supposed to get when you retire. So that's still existing at this point. And as someone who's self-employed, running your own pool service business, you are paying into that. So don't think that since you're not an employee or working for a company, you're not paying into the system, but you are paying into the system when you file your taxes. It may be a little different how it's entered in there, but you are actually getting some Social Security benefits depending on how much taxable income you're reporting every year. And so the reason why I said that the younger you are, the more you should be thinking about it, because if you plan ahead, it's going to be a lot easier for you. It's kind of like if you were planning a wedding and, most people are probably married already and some people may not be yet. But if you're planning your wedding and you started planning it 6 months in advance, so the venues are probably available. You're going to be able to pick your time. You're going to be able to get the caterer lined up, 6 months in advance should be good. And let's say 6 months in advance, that's someone who's 20 years old in this retirement kind of talk here. And if you're planning that same wedding and you're planning it with only 1 month in advance, chances are that venue is not going to be available. The caterer is probably not going to be available. You won't get the dress in time or the tuxedos. I guess you plan your wedding a lot more in advance than that, maybe a year in advance. But this is representing someone who's in their 50s with 1 month to plan the wedding. And that's kind of how you should be looking at it. The more you can plan, the better off you're going to be. Now, whether you have mutual funds or you use index funds or whatever you're going to do to put some extra money in, you have to have the extra money to invest first. And that's the key here. And I think this is why 22%, this is the latest survey, 22% of Americans are able to retire. That's the 2022 stat. So that leaves 78% of Americans that can't retire when they should retire, which is why you see a lot of people that are up in age working in stores that you're like, hey, are they working for fun or are they working because they have to? And one of those things I always think about, and I think the majority of them, according to this statistic, they're not working for fun. They're working because they have to. So if you don't want to work into your 70s, you have to plan while you're in your 20s for that to happen. If you're in your 50s and you're just starting to plan your retirement, I think you're in a pretty bad situation where you have to really accelerate it and maybe don't take any risk. I wouldn't say go to Vegas and put 100,000 on black. Or I don't even know how the roulette wheel works. Something like that. You just want to be conservative also, but you might have to get you might have to increase your retirement investing at that point. But you should be at the point where you're young enough to think about this and plan ahead for this, because without planning ahead, you're going to be in a pretty bad situation with the 78% of Americans who can't retire. So I know I got sidetracked there, and I mentioned that you need to have money to invest. And the way you have money to invest is by building your business up to a point where it's profitable. And what I mean by profitable, and this is one of those things where it's kind of gray and it's hard to nail this down entirely, but you just basically want to take all the money you bring in, your income from your pool service, your spouse's income from her work, and combine all that together, take all of your household expenses, the mortgage payment, if you have car payments, anything that's a payment of any type or liability. And you don't really need to pay for a financial course to do this. It's pretty basic. So just take all of your income that you make that year, and it's getting near the end of the year, so this is a good time to do that. Then take all of your expenses. This may take some time to calculate. You can kind of ballpark a few of them if you can't remember. And then write those down on just a regular piece of paper, or if you're fancy, put it in an Excel spreadsheet. And once you have all that, you have your expenses, you have the money you make, there should be a portion that's left over that's not negative. And hopefully the portion is somewhere around 20 to 30,000 a year that you have extra that you can invest in. I know that's a pretty bold amount, but that's like 2,000 a month roughly. And this will be a really good kickstart to your investing if you have that kind of money to invest. You can do several things with that. Again, you can just put it in a mutual fund and watch it grow over the next 30 years. That's not a problem. A Roth IRA would be my recommendation because it's an investment that grows. It's a tax shelter. Well, I don't know. I should back up. Let me explain this correctly. You pay the taxes now, and so when you draw the money out of the Roth IRA later, you're not paying taxes on that money. So if you had a Roth IRA and there's $400,000 in that account and you're 70 years old, you can draw out any of that amount later and not pay taxes on it because you're not getting any kind of tax benefit now. You're not able to deduct that from your taxes now. And so the benefit of this is that later, when you're older, who knows what tax bracket you're going to be in or where the tax rate's going to be. And so if you already have paid taxes on that now, then you draw that out later. And I guess a practical example is if you had your money in a 401k, the same 400,000, and let's say you wanted to buy a new truck, the 2035 Toyota Tacoma model's out, you wanted to purchase that, or 2040, depending on what year you're in. It's like all electric. It's really cool. And the sticker price is like 60,000. And if you had a 401k and you drew out 60,000, you'd have to pay taxes on that 60,000 that you drew out of your account because that's considered income at that point because you just added $60,000 by drawing it out. and then your tax rate, depending on what it is, it could be anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 of that money would be taxed by the IRS. But if you had that $400,000 in a Roth IRA and you wanted to buy that truck, you could pull $60,000 out. And since you pay taxes already when you establish the Roth IRA, when you're contributing to it every year, you could take that $60,000 out and not pay income tax on that money. So that's an important factor when you're investing. I believe the Roth IRA, the maximum you can put in is $6,000 or $12,000 if you're a married couple per year, and that will grow. So I would say in the minimum, you want to be putting $1,000 into the Roth IRA so that you have some money growing there. If you just are totally opposed to the market and don't like the stock market, you can, of course, just invest in real estate. That would be the one I would tell you to invest in. Probably this year is not the best year to invest because the home prices seem to be inflated still, and interest rates are pretty high, although you can still probably find good deals out there. I watch the market all the time. I'm not buying anything this year, but I like to. Actually, I bought something earlier this year before the rates went up, but I like to watch what's on the market, and I see some pretty good deals. I see some people cutting their price by $80,000 or $100,000 here, which in California it's a lot because if the medium home is like $800,000 or $900,000 or $1 million, depending on what county you're in. So saving $80,000 to $100,000 is actually pretty decent. But if you aren't buying this year, you want to put your money into a savings account and keep saving it for a down payment. The more you put down on an investment property, the easier it is to qualify for it. That's number one. And most banks in California are going to want 30% minimum now. You could probably try to get a 25% down payment on an investment property, but the bank will probably come back saying you need to put 30% down. And so what's 30%? If the purchase price was $400,000, 30% would be $120,000, and that would leave you a mortgage of $280,000. Now, if you don't have a primary home to live in right now, you're renting, you may want to be saving for your first house, or you may want to bypass your first house and just buy a rental property because the tax benefits of a rental property are actually pretty decent. You get to write off the interest, you get to write off all the repairs and all the other things that go with that. So that might be something to consider because buying a personal residence at 7% is pretty ugly. However, when the rates drop down to 4% or 5% again, you're going to see a huge influx of refinance applications and you'll be able to refinance your mortgage. And I don't think they're going to be this high. I mean, I'm not going to say if for sure if they're going to stay this high past the next year or so, but I would think that once the economy stabilizes and the inflation levels off, interest rates may taper back down. But basically, an interest rate at 4% versus 7%, you're paying about 30% more for that loan and interest. There's actually a really cool app that you can get. It's called Mortgage News Daily. It's a free app, and this is an app that tracks interest rates, and it also has a really cool calculator in there. So if you go to Mortgage News Daily and download that app, there's actually a calculator that shows you how much interest you're going to pay based on the interest rate, based on the loan amount, and the amount of years you're carrying that loan for. And so you can play with that calculator and see, if you're buying an investment property, what's your total payment with property tax and insurance, and will that make money or not? And at 7% interest, you're going to be hard pressed to make money on any investment property across the whole nation at this point. So you may break even or lose money until you can refinance that. And refinancing an investment property may be a little more difficult, but I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit. Real estate is always a good investment because you're going to be able to collect the rent from the tenants. They're going to be paying down the mortgage. So eventually it'll be paid off after 30 years, regardless of what you do, if you make extra payments or not. So after 30 years, you're going to have that house free and clear. So if you're 25 and you bought a rental property and you're making, some rent income on that, when you're 55, that'll be paid off, and then you'll have no more mortgage, and then that'll be a pretty good retirement income for you. Better to have 2 of those or 3 of those, and that way you can maximize your retirement income with those rental properties. But regardless, if you pay any extra payments at all after 30 years, it'll be paid off. And if you're making any kind of cash flow, which is money above what you're paying on expenses, then the tenants are basically paying off that mortgage for you. So it's a great investment, I think. That's why I like real estate. Right now, it's kind of a weird year to invest in it. Then I would probably say wait until late next year. So keep saving your money. And even if you save more than 30%, that's good because you can put the other portion aside for another rental property the following year or the year after that. So I would say a good investment right now would be to save money for the down payment for an investment property and maybe bypass your personal home if you haven't found one yet and you're renting. I would consider to stay renting at this point and use that money to buy an investment property first. And then later, when the interest rates drop to a point where it makes sense to lose money on your personal residence because you can't really deduct much from that, then you would purchase that particular home. So whichever direction you go, whether you put the money in the market or you start saving for a down payment for a real estate investment, the bottom line is you need to have some money saved and some profit in your business. The more profit you can make, the more money you save, the better off you're going to be later in life. If you're, in your 20s and you have your own home right now and you have a really low mortgage payment or you have the mortgage paid down, I would really suggest saving money for a down payment. And in the worst case scenario, let's say the interest rates stay at 7-8% for the next 3 or 5 years, you can pretty much save enough money in that 5-year period to buy a house cash if you need to. You're not going to get great tax benefits by doing that. I would suggest that as the last option, but you can maybe buy 2 homes and have 2 mortgages on there. You can do a number of different things, but you need to have the money available and you need to start early so that later on you're not going to be working at Walmart or working out in the pool industry still, doing repairs here and there to make extra money. You really don't want to be working at a certain point. You want to stop working. I'm 51. I just turned 51 at the beginning of November. And of course, I planned all this out 22 years ago. So I think I'm in a fairly good position at this point. And if you weren't planning, if you didn't plan anything and you're in your 50s, you can definitely accelerate that because your 50s and 60s are your largest income making years statistically. So when you get to 50 and between 50 and 65, you should be making the most money that you've ever made in your life at those ages, not the opposite. And so you can really accelerate this and you can save money up to buy a rental property and put a larger down payment so that the mortgage can be paid off faster. Maybe refinance it to a 15-year mortgage and you would have that income. And then you would still get Social Security, of course, because it still exists right now. And so if you're paying into that system, you'll have that money available also. But the bottom line is, if you're in your 20s, you should really be focused on the future. I know it's kind of like, I don't want to look that far ahead. I'm living my life now. I'm going to go on a vacation. I'm going to do this and that. But really, if you don't look ahead and you don't invest when you're young, you're going to be doing pools into your 60s and 70s. You're going to be working at Walmart in your 70s and 80s when you can't hold a pole anymore because you have arthritis. You just don't want that life. And the average lifespan for someone born, I think if you were born in the year 2020, you're going to live to 100 years old. I mean, you're not a 2-year-old doing pool service, but you get the idea that you're going to have a longer lifespan as the years go on. So you have to plan for that. And I think planning is everything. And so start looking on investment sites. I think the best podcast for real estate investing is Bigger Pockets. They're pretty big, and Bigger Pockets would be my go-to podcast for real estate. If you're looking for stocks, there's tons of people that have different channels on the stock market, and you can look into doing that. I probably would not recommend individual stocks because statistically, I think only 6% of investors actually make money on individual stocks over the period of time that you would have in a mutual fund. So do your research and find out, the best way to invest your money. And there's so many resources now out there in books and on the internet, on YouTube, that you can definitely get a good, solid retirement plan going. And in the worst case scenario, you would have to find a financial planner, and they're going to be more geared towards investing in the stock market than real estate. So just be aware of that. If you do find a financial advisor, they're going to be wanting you to invest in mutual funds, and they're going to really talk down about real estate. One last thing about real estate I should mention, and I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the fact that the tenants pay off the house over 30 years. That paid off house actually has value because real estate's a great hedge against inflation. It's always going up in value. It's only been 1 year, and this year might be the second year in like 40 years that real estate prices actually went down slightly. And I think over time, prices always go up. And so, you've heard like people that had bought a house back in the 70s for like $40,000. And you're like, wow, that's so cheap. But they can buy a gallon of milk for like 50 cents. And, gas was like 65 cents back then. And so you can see how as inflation goes and the dollar has less value, or you can buy less with it, having real estate is really a benefit, because if someone bought a house in the 70s for 60,000, that house is probably like worth 1.2 million right now, with them doing nothing but holding on to it for 50 years. And so that's the benefit of real estate. You have an asset that if you needed to, you can sell and cash out and take that money and use it for whatever you need to. That money's growing as a hedge against inflation. But with all that said, really, if you're young, you should be thinking about what you're going to do when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the earlier you start to think about it, the better chance you have of having a successful retirement. Just like the wedding example, if you plan your wedding a year in advance, which a lot of people do, I did this myself, you have a good chance of getting the venue, getting everything set, cash flowing the wedding, which I did. I saved every month. This is back in, I'm going to get in trouble here. I got to remember the year I got married, back in 1996. And I cash flowed my wedding because I had a year to save for it. Me and my wife had a year to save for it. So the longer you have to save for something, the better off you're going to be. And that's the same thing with retirement. So whatever you do, start when you're in your 20s, at the latest in your 30s. And if you're in your 40s or 50s, just accelerate things, put your foot on the gas pedal, cut expenses, do whatever you can, and start investing. And you're going to have to invest a lot of money very quickly to make up for all those years you didn't do it. You don't want to be in that situation. And so I know a lot of people listening are younger pool guys and gals out there. Just start looking at ways to invest. And I definitely think you're going to be way ahead of the curve if you start in your 20s. If you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on that podcast icon, and that'll take you to a drop-down menu of other podcasts I recorded. I also have a coaching program. You can learn more about that at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.